Improving at chess can be an absolute maze sometimes, but usually, if you have something you're particularly weak at, there's a surefire way to improve it. If you're weak in the opening, you can study some opening theory. If you're weak in the endgame, you can analyze some famous endgames. But the hardest part of any chess game is what comes in between those two things, the middle game. You can't possibly prepare yourself for every single middle game that you will ever play. Even if you change a seemingly insignificant part of your usual setup, you might have to completely overhaul your game plan in comparison to other games. So in today's video, I'll be going through how you can make your own plans and strategize during the middle game no matter how tricky the position is. On my community tab on YouTube, I asked you guys for some positions that you found yourself stuck in the middle game. We'll be going through some of those positions today, and I'll be walking you through how I would make plans in these positions. We're going to sit and analyze these positions together, and then I have a super unique way of proving to you guys that these were the optimal plans. So stay until the end of the video for that. But first, let's understand the process that we'll be using to orchestrate a plan in each of these positions. We need to formulate a procedure that we can use in every position we have. It's helpful for us to split this up into three main sections. Let's look at them chronologically. The evaluation. For this game, we'll be playing with the black pieces, so let's look at what's good and bad for the black side first. We have the bishop pair, which is great, but our light squared bishop is currently undeveloped, and our dark squared bishop is a little bit stuck on the queen side because of the e5 pawn's defense of the d6 square. The dark squared bishop is pinning the knight to the enemy king, but we can expect white to castle kingside on the next move, so unless we can utilize this right now, it's probably not important. Our queen has limited squares to develop to because of the knight on f3, and white's light squared bishop is threatening to not only give us doubled pawns, but also a backwards pawn on the c-file. White also has the half-open c-file to easily attack this potential weakness, which adds insult to injury. We have a slight lack of central control, but other than that, there's not too many other important dynamics in the position for black. For the white side, they don't have the bishop pair, and they haven't castled. They also have just prevented us from playing bishop g4 with h3, but in doing so have created a hook that could be used to sacrifice material later on. White controls the majority of the center and has the half-open c-file. White can also consider lifting rooks on the e-file at some point in the game because the e-pawn is so far advanced. White has positive tension with the light squared bishop attacking the knight on c6. However, it's also not white's turn to move and must respond to our threats first. If you're wondering how I know these things are good and bad, I can't really individually explain them without talking for the next 10 minutes. But generally, they play the biggest role in making tactics or checkmating threats available for either side. I've compiled a full list of things that you should be looking out for in your games in a Google Doc in the description below. This is actually the same document that I use when I coach my students. Speaking of, if you'd like to book a lesson, the link for that is in the description below as well. The perfect position. Now, with our newly found understanding of the position, we need to construct an ideal world. This is the best advice I've ever been given on the middle game. I heard it from Hikaru Nakamura, and it's very simple. Put your pieces on their best squares. Doing this and imagining where all of your pieces should be on the board is the best way to construct any kind of middle game plan. So we can put our pieces anywhere on the board as long as the maneuvering is somewhat realistic. So let's begin by doing this. It's important to understand that as to not confuse ourselves, we don't need to worry about the order in which we do things in right now. So where should our pieces go? Immediately, the first thing I want to do is fix our pawn structure and put the knight on a better square. So let's play knight e7, knight g6, and c6. Our queenside pawn chain is much healthier than it was before, and there is no more tension between the bishop and the knight. We'll also give white the move bishop d3 so their bishop isn't hanging. White still has strong control over the center though, so let's play f6, e takes f6, and rook takes f6. This frees up the d6 square for our bishop and breaks open the rook on the f-file. We can continue by playing bishop d6 here, and essentially we've achieved a position where all of our pieces are on their optimal squares. Of course, we could keep going here and put the enemy king in checkmate, but we want to be somewhat realistic here. So, out of the opening, this is our plan. Our plan should be to achieve a position like this all the way back from where we started. However, the most important thing to understand about this methodology is the fact that in chess you don't always get what you want. Every single move that is played on the board, we need to reevaluate things and ask ourselves if the pieces still want to go to those squares. Sometimes those squares won't be available anymore, and sometimes there might be a better square for pieces to land on. We can't predict the future and should take things as they come, constantly reevaluating the position. Problem solving. Now comes the hard part. Not only do we need to bring all of this planning to fruition, but we need to constantly change our plans depending on what our opponent plays. But first, let's look at what happened in the actual game. a6 was immediately played by black in this position. However, as we outlined, white is more than happy to trade off our knight as they will happily target the backwards pawn. However, bishop d3 was played by white, which is an inaccuracy, as now white possesses no threats and black can start improving their position. Knight e7 was played, which isn't a terrible move, but this is why I mentioned the fact that we need to reevaluate things with every extra move that is played on the board. Whilst knight e7 does improve the knight, the priority which we should be giving that move has significantly lowered because there's no impending threat on that knight being traded off. The knight still needs to move once more to reach g6, and even then, it's still not going to be a super active knight. Black should have played f6 immediately instead of knight e7, reclaiming central control and allowing the dark squared bishop to re-enter the game. White plays rook c1, which isn't a bad move, but there are more logical moves for white. But now, black's intention is obvious. They wanted to play bishop f5 to trade off white's strong bishop. The problem I have with this is that if you just trade everything off the board that worries you in a position, you're never going to be better, but only drawn. We should be fighting to prove our light squared bishop is better than theirs. The simple knight g6 would have weakened white's bishop dramatically as it would obstruct its side of the king. After the pieces were traded, queen c2 is a tricky move to handle. You need to find knight h4 or bishop takes d2 check, and take advantage of the fact that white hasn't castled yet to avoid losing a pawn. However, in this position, black rolls over and plays knight e7, forfeiting the pawn and losing the game entirely a few moves later. Now, I could sit here and play the original position against someone 600 elo lower rated than me and pretend it proves my point. I'm not going to do that. But instead, I'm going to prove that this plan is a working one by playing with the white pieces instead. If there's one thing that we can all agree on and trust, it's that the engine is better than any human on the planet. So I'm going to play with the white pieces and let the engine play with the black pieces and see what long-term plan it comes up with. We'll see the similarities of my plan and the engine's plan and what the differences were. So let's get into that game. So we're going to play the strongest bot on chess.com to kind of outline this plan and see what the engine comes up with. So immediately we already know that we have to take this knight, or we at least have to stop this knight takes d5 move, and I think the simplest way to do that is by giving up the bishop pair and proceeding to castle. Black already coming with this this tempo on my rook. I do wonder if they will swing back or if this is just a better plan to keep the bishop on this diagonal. I think we have to play rook e1. Don't think there's something better. Black immediately goes for a5, and I'm more than happy to kick this bishop away and get out of this pin. Really don't like that pin. a3 now. If I play rook c1, I feel like black is going to fix their pawn structure. Yep, there you go, c6. So immediately, our plan looks quite similar to what the engine is coming up with here, except that we didn't go for this a5 move. And I think that now we should just start rerouting this knight into the game. Really, there's no, I don't think knight b3, knight c5 is doing anything. We're looking at a bunch of unimportant squares here. So let's just go knight f1. The queen comes to d7. I think the queen coming to d7 is supporting the move f6. It's my best kind of guess, because if, for example, if they played f6 here, I think maybe we could get away with playing e6. I'm not sure if we'd be hanging on to that pawn, but it probably would be a little bit annoying for black. So they're playing queen d7 here. And I think we just continue with our plan of knight g3, rerouting the knights. They're playing a4 here, really locking everything up. Then now there's no loose pawns. This rook can kind of come over this side without having to worry about this pawn. And this bishop is just... I mean, maybe this was an oversight by me. The bishop does look a lot better on b5 than it did on c8, kind of threatening these sacrificing ideas. Because now, I mean, this is just a lot of space in our position that could be used for defensive measures that is kind of blockaded now. It's actually not so simple to figure out a plan here. I'm wondering if, like, knight h2 and knight g4 are good ideas. There's maybe a rook e3... Queen d2. I'm going to play queen d2. I don't think it really matters what we play. It's just what black kind of responds with. Let's play queen d2. They play queen c2. I'm not sure if the idea is still to go for this f6 move, but we'll see. We could go for knight g5 here. I'm almost intrigued. We do have the power to go back and see what the engine would have played if we played a different move. So if we just waste a move, what is the engine going to do here? F6. So they're going for the exact same plan. Pawn structure is here. The only thing that we kind of missed is that maybe the bishop is stronger on this diagonal as opposed to this one. So it looks like they're going for the exact same plan. If we do this, we can take here. Looks pretty similar. The only thing that needs to happen now is bishop d6 going to be played. We can play another move. There, and there you go. Position is exactly, we can swap over to what we thought the position would look like in just a second. And the similarities are quite apparent. So we've got this bishop on the d6 square, which is where the bishop ended up in this game. The only thing we got really wrong was that this bishop would prefer to be on the outside of the pawn chain as opposed to in here. This rook got open in the exact same way by pushing for f6. This rook even got active by pushing this pawn all the way down the board, so there are no weaknesses on the queen side. The queen gets in front of the rook in this line that the engine played, and I mean, you can see that the plan was very similar. Get the bishop on this diagonal, f6, and there are a lot of similarities with the plan that we came up with and the plan that the engine came up with. As you can see with what the engine came up with, whilst the engine did prefer some hyperaccuracies that we didn't even look at, there are general consistencies between the two plans. Of course, the engine is always going to figure out a better plan than the ones that we come up with. But the point is that we were able to identify a decent plan with a super easy formula. The pawn chain was fixed by the black pieces. The move f6 was played to not only reclaim central control, but to activate the rook and both bishops as well. Now that we've established a methodology to making plans in the middle game, it's time to take the training wheels off. Let's take another position that you guys sent in. However, it's going to be a little bit different this time. First of all, this position is a lot trickier than the last one. Most of our pieces are developed, and it feels like the same methodology can't be applied. I'm telling you right now, it can. I'm not going to be walking through this position with you, nor am I going to be telling you my plans. I encourage you to pause the video here and try to solve it yourself. After the game is finished, I'll be walking through my plans and what I was thinking during the game, using the same methodology that we used before, and this way you guys can do some critical thinking on your own. So let's get into the game. So we're playing this position against the highest rated bot on chess.com again, and we're going to play out 10 moves and see what plan the engine comes up with. If there's not too much difference in the position, we'll go to like 15 moves maybe, but generally speaking, we want to see what plan the engine comes up with. I'm going to be playing with the black pieces on this side, and just to make it easier for you guys, the white pieces are going to be over here, which I want you guys to be calculating a plan for. If you need to, you can pause the video here and figure out your plan, but I have to respond immediately to the move e5. If I had to evaluate this position, I would say that white is better, just because these pieces just feel a little bit better. I mean, primarily the knight feels a lot better than my knight, which really has just no way to ever develop. This pawn tension also feels like it maybe favors white a little bit. So let's play bishop g7. And I mean, 2 moves here. I don't know if it matters which one you play. Bishop c4. I like trying to neutralize the bishop and trying to trade things off. I feel like I'm worse. Very happy to trade things off if I'm worse. Okay. We've got a capture for free. Ooh, okay. So e6 feels like a plan. It feels like the plan. How do I stop? So e6 immediately, I just take maybe. And then takes here, you've kind of overextended yourself. But I assume that like a move like g3 is going to come. So I feel like I need to blockade this somehow. The knight has no useful reroutes. The rook could maybe be used here. But there's also this move that I could just move my queen. Moving my queen, yeah. I don't mind this. I don't mind just moving my queen here. Jeez, he's got so many open files. Even the b file could, like, here is like rook b1 gonna come. Let's just play it. Okay, h4. h4 idea was with h5, trying to undermine everything. Maybe g3, king g2, rook h1 is a plan. trying to really make these rooks count. I mean, you've already got this a half open file. I mean, this I would even consider a half open file, and then this one too. I can't go something like this. Do I go H? If I go something like this, I just leave I let the knight get in, which is something that I don't want. I could go. Maybe the idea should be rook e8 to play f6, because if I play f6 right now, I'm pretty certain that e6 will come and I lose. Although that doesn't really help, does it? Let's play rook e8. Okay, h5 comes now. I don't think I can get away with this just yet. If I go here, can I go king h8? King h8 does this probably. Can I take? Maybe I can take and play king h8. What is the threat here? The threat, are you gonna go there? Okay. Ooh. I don't know if that's... Okay, we definitely can't go here because I'm just getting checked and I'm losing everything. I can't go here. I don't mind queen b8. Oh, queen b8 runs into this same problem again. I think I'm just losing. I think the engine has found a plan here. This h4 h5 plan has worked out very nicely. Also just taking advantage of these tensions in the center to kind of displace my queen on b7. Now my queen can't really get in. I'll just play this out and lose the game because I'm pretty sure we are going to lose. The knight gets in here. Again, this knight really can't do anything. Should I just close everything up with knight here? Let's see what happens. Okay, we get forked. And we get checkmated. Fair enough. Of course, I was always going to lose that game pretty badly, but let's go back to the start of the game and try to figure out a plan of our own. We'll use the exact same methodology as the other game we looked at, so let's start by evaluating everything. For the white side, our king is completely safe. And the only worrying piece in the position is black's light-squared bishop, which is aimed at our king. We have a great half-open b-file, and if e5 is played, the e-file is largely open for rook lifting opportunities. Our isolated a-pawn can be used for minority attacks on the queen side, possibly opening up our a-file and creating a permanent backwards pawn for the black pieces. Our light-squared bishop is well placed, staring at the king, however the pawn structure surrounding black's king somewhat blunts its potential. White also has great tension between the c and d pawns, as black cannot take without discovering an attack on their queen. For black, the kingside structure has plenty of dark squared holes in it, however it currently has a dark squared defender. The knight on d7 is majorly inactive and is easily the worst piece on the board. Black also only has one half-open file which stares into a protected pawn which cannot be captured by black because of various pins. So with this being said, let's set up an analysis board for white and see what the perfect position would look like. Immediately we want to play e5. It restricts black's kingside and opens up our light-squared bishop. So let's put e5 and bishop g7 on the board. It's somewhat unclear to me if taking the bishop on g7 is good or not, so we'll leave it there for now. The position might be confusing because it seems like our pieces are already active, but there is one great rule I always follow. If you don't have any good piece moves, you have good pawn moves. We just made our bishop on d3 better with a pawn move, so let's identify some more pawn moves. a4 and h4 are my two options. h4 is commonly used to undermine Fianchetto structures. Let's say if h4 and h5, black cannot take without allowing our light-squared bishop to become incredibly strong. You could also explore a4 and a5, which in my opinion is also a great plan. For example, if b takes a5, we have two easy targets on the a-file. However, this approach seems slower, although winning. Let's say after h4 and h5 they don't take, but we are allowed to take on g6. Maybe h takes g6 and h takes g6. The knight now seems like the piece we need to improve. Knight h7 and knight d2 are both options, but I feel as if knight d2 is slightly more flexible. So let's say knight d2 and knight e4. Now our knight is threatening to land on d6, and if the bishop captures it, we've neutralized black's best piece. As I mentioned before, we could keep going until checkmate, but we have to leave it somewhere, so let's stop before it gets too crazy. The engine went for a very similar plan to this. However, the engine believed it didn't even need its light-squared bishop to prove h4 and h5 was a good plan, and instead dived in with the queen and knight to checkmate me. It also decided that the dark-squared bishop on g7 was more of a liability than a defender for black. It constricted the king massively, and because of the pawn on e5, it really couldn't partake in anything other than defensive duties. It also paired the move h4 and h5 with a new reroute for the knight. Black taking on h5 allowed the knight to develop much quicker to h4, showing that if you give the engine better ideas than it had originally planned for, it is going to reevaluate things. Now, let's look at what actually happened in the game. Immediately instead of e5, white played bishop a6. I assume this is because white identified that black's best piece was the bishop on b7 and was afraid of it. However, like we mentioned before, we should be proving our bishop is better than theirs, not trading it off. After the captures, bishop g7 was played, and it feels like with enough trades, black is going to equalize here. The bishops are traded, and white plays queen a3 to reroute the queen back into the game. After knight f6, e5 now comes, but allows black to put what we thought was their worst piece onto the best square on the board. g3 stops the knight from progressing further, but now we've come to a position where we just traded off all of our attacking potential instead of using it with initiative. This gave black time to improve their bad pieces, and suddenly black feels much better here. Notice that absolutely none of the good plans we outlined were displayed in this game. White's only real plan here was to trade off the bishops and hope the pawn structure favors white in the endgame, but it obviously was never going to. White has a backwards pawn on c3, an isolated flank pawn on a2, white's half-open file now seems useless, and black's rooks feel like the best pieces on the board. Of course, this methodology is only as good as the player using it. The better you are at evaluating positions and calculating, the more effective this formula is going to be. If you're interested, I have another video up on my channel explaining how you can analyze things in a bit more detail than what we went through today. That will be in the description of this video. But generally speaking, even having an average plan is better than having no plan at all. I see far too many people playing either a3 or h3 and just waiting for their opponent to make a commitment in the position so they can figure out a better plan. There is always a best move in any chess position. I hope that my games against the engine prove to you that there are always moves to either hold on in a position or to take an advantage. Middle games are the hardest part of any chess game, so even after watching this video, don't feel bad if you feel like you're still bad at the middle game. But hopefully this simple solution helps you take a step in the right direction. I hope you all enjoyed today's video, and if you have any questions or you're confused about anything, feel free to leave a comment below and I'll be happy to follow up on it. I also offer coaching in the description below where I go through exactly what's in this video in much more detail. All of my coaching is specifically tailored to the student and their playstyle, so hopefully this is an option for some people as well. But other than that, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.